Section 2.9 is a extremely long section. We looked at commission, we looked at simple interest, which in and of itself, those are two very big concepts. And yet we still have another concept in Section 2.9 dealing with tips and taxes. And so a tip is an amount of money that's added to a bill for a service. So if somebody does something really well and you want to give them a little bit extra, and I'll talk about that in class. But that's a tip. It, and this should be capitalized, there we go, it is usually a percent of the bill before sales tax is added. Sales tax is a percent of the item's cost. So if you live in Minnesota, many things have a 7% sales tax or a 6.5% sales tax. Some gas has a certain amount of sales tax. They use that to pay for roads and construction. If you don't do this, but if you smoke cigarettes, there's a ginormous sales tax on cigarettes because of the huge health concerns and huge health costs. And so there's lots of stuff that goes along with that. But sales tax is a percent of that item's cost. So we look at percents, lots of percent stuff, because percents play a huge role in everyday life. What we're going to be doing is we're not going to be calculating exact numbers in the next couple of questions here. And on the test, it'll be the same idea. We're going to estimate. And this is what you would do if you were actually, buying food. Lunch at the restaurant is $27.88. You want to estimate a 15% tip. So that's a decent tip. Not a great tip, not a bad tip, a decent tip. So it's a decent tip, and we're going to estimate. One thing that we're going to do if we're going to estimate is we're going to change this $27.88. That's hard to work with as an estimate. We're going to pretend that's about $28. There we go, $28. So we're just going to round up to the nearest dollar amount there. 15%, that's already a nice whole number, 15%. And so we're going to figure out what 15% of $28 is. That's our new question. But we're not going to set it up as a proportion. We're not going to set it up as an equation and solve it. We're not going to use a calculator. We're going to try and do this in much more of a mental capacity without using calculators and other tools like that. We say, well, $28, all right, let's see. I can figure out 10% pretty easily. 10% of something is, well, if you think about 10 out of 100, 10 out of 100, we're really just getting rid of 1 0. And so we're just moving that decimal place over 1. We're dividing by 10, essentially. And so $2.80, that's 10%. 10% is an easy number to find because it's just simply moving that place value over. So 10% is $2.80. Well, if 10% is $2.80, 5% is going to be half of that because 5 is half of 10. So $1.40 would be 5%. And so you're going, where are you getting these numbers from? Why are you doing this? Well, I want to figure out what 15% of $28 is. And I don't want to use a calculator to do it because I don't have one handy. So one way to do this is to know that, well, 15 is the same as 10 and 5. 10 is an easy percent to find. 10% is just moving that decimal over 1 to the left. Once I know 10%, I can find 5% easily by dividing it in half. Since 10% plus 5% is 15%, $2.80 plus $1.40 is going to give me $4.20. So without using a calculator, I was able to figure out what 15% of $28 was, and so $4.20 is going to be a pretty good estimate of what a 15% tip on a $27.88 meal is. So that's one way that we're going to be using these estimates. And what I want you to do on tests, on homework, on quizzes, is I want you to round the dollar amount to the nearest dollar. And if this percent is not a whole number, we're going to change that slightly as well. So it's at least a little bit easier to work with. Here's another example. The sales tax rate is 7.25%. We want to estimate the sales tax on a book that costs $19.97. So 1997, that was a great year, but we're going to change it to 2000 because that was a better year. So we're going to do $20. $20, that's a good estimate of 1997. And 7.25%, well, let's just change that to 7% because that's going to be easier to work with. All right, so we want to figure out what 7% of $20 is. All right, so 7% of $20. What's an easier way to break this down? There's a couple ways you could do it. You could do 5%, isn't too hard to find. Again, we just figure out what 10% is and divide by 2. And then we could do 1% and 1%. That's 7%. 5 plus 1 plus 1 is 7. So we could do it that way. We could also do it, I'm going to do it both ways, but we could also say, well, I can figure out what 10% is if I subtract 3%. So instead of adding, if I take away 1%, 1%, and 1%, I'm going to get that 7% as well. So you either figure out 5% and adding 2% on, or you're doing it with 10% subtracting. Neither way is better than the other. Let's do the red way first. So 7% of $20. Again, I can find 10% pretty easily. Move the decimal over. 10% is $2. If 10% is $2, 5% is $1, because it's half of 10%. Okay, so that wasn't so bad. 1%. If 10% is $2, I move that decimal over one more time. 1%, because I'm just dividing by 10 now, 1%, 20 cents. So same thing over here, 1% is 20 cents. So I can either now do $1 plus 20 cents plus 20 cents gives me 7% as $1.40. Or I can do $2 minus 60 cents. So that 7% could also be $1.40. Either way, you're going to get that correct answer of $1.40. And so what I want you to do in these next two examples is I want you to try and find, or estimate the sales tax and the tip using some of these methods of finding 10%, finding 5%, finding 1%, and working with it from there. It takes a little bit of practice, but the idea is that we're not relying on a calculator. We're getting a better sense of how percents work and how we can find shortcuts with 10% or 5%. And it is important to get these concepts down. It's not just teaching you how to use a calculator. That's not my role here. My role is to teach you how to think. And thinking is very difficult, surprisingly. So try these two on your own. Do try it. Don't just use your calculator and do 0.15 times. Try this estimating idea. It'll give you a better sense of numbers and make things much easier as we move forward in the next couple chapters. Trust me. Okay, I'm assuming you paused. I'm assuming you tried it on your own. For the first one, if you got somewhere around $3.30, that's what we're looking for. So that's rounding that number and getting an estimate of about $3.30. If you did not get that, make sure you're watching these linked videos. And the next one, this one, there's some variance here, but I'm going to guess that many of you, if you did it, got $5.52 as your estimate. So if you didn't get those, or if you have no idea how to do those problems, watch that linked video, see some more examples of how it's done, and then try some on your own.